November 1942, Guadalcanal. A Japanese lieutenant named Tanaka crouches in a waterlogged foxhole on the edge of Henderson Field. His uniform hangs loose on a frame that's lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. He hasn't eaten rice in 4 days. The malaria shakes come in waves now, predictable as the American artillery that pounds his position every morning at dawn. He watches the tree line through eyes that struggle to focus. His orders are simple: hold this position, wait for reinforcements, prepare for the next offensive. The Imperial General Staff promised those reinforcements would arrive with food, medicine, ammunition. That was 3 weeks ago. Tanaka hears the sound before he sees it. The low rumble grows into a roar. American transport planes, fat-bellied C-47s, sweep over the jungle canopy in formation. He counts them, 12 aircraft. They circle Henderson Field like they own the sky, which, he realizes with sinking certainty, they do. Parachutes blossom white against the tropical blue. Crate after crate floats down to the American lines. He watches through borrowed binoculars as enemy soldiers rush to collect the cargo. They move with energy, with purpose, with the confidence of men who know more supplies are coming tomorrow. What Tanaka doesn't know yet is that those 12 planes represent just one tiny fraction of 1% of America's logistical apparatus. What he can't comprehend from his starving foxhole is that the industrial nation across the Pacific is about to demonstrate a form of warfare Japan has no doctrine to counter. This isn't about tactics or courage or fighting spirit. This is about something the Imperial Japanese Army never planned for. Something their entire military philosophy dismissed as unworthy of the samurai tradition. This is about supplies. Endless, overwhelming, impossible supplies. Let's step back 6 months. June 1942. The Imperial Japanese Navy has just suffered a devastating defeat at Midway, losing 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. But on land, Japanese forces still control a vast empire stretching from Burma to the Solomon Islands, an area encompassing over 5 million square miles. Tokyo's confidence remains high. The Americans are soft, their generals say, spoiled by luxury. They'll never have the stomach for the brutal jungle fighting required to take back these islands. Japanese military doctrine in 1942 focuses on spiritual strength over material advantage. The concept of Yamato Damashi, the spirit of old Japan, teaches that willpower and discipline can overcome numerical or technological disadvantages. Officers at the Imperial Army War College study the battles of the Russo-Japanese War, where outnumbered Japanese forces defeated a European power through superior morale and night attacks. They believe this same formula will work against America: victory through spirit, victory through sacrifice, victory through accepting hardship that softer nations cannot endure. The mathematics tell a different story. In 1942, the United States produces approximately 47,000 aircraft. Japan produces 8,800. American shipyards launch 746 vessels totaling over 8 million tons. Japanese yards manage 260 ships totaling just over 1 million tons. American factories turn out 24,000 tanks. Japan builds 1,200. These numbers circulate among some Japanese naval officers who understand industrial capacity. The Army largely ignores them. Numbers on paper don't win battles, they insist. Fighting spirit does. But raw production is only half the equation. The real challenge is moving those supplies across 6,000 miles of ocean, then distributing them to soldiers fighting on jungle islands with no ports, no roads, no infrastructure. Military experts on both sides understand this problem. The Japanese believe it's unsolvable. They're counting on distance and terrain to neutralize America's industrial advantage. After all, what good are tanks and planes and artillery shells if you can't get them to the battlefield? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the logistics that changed the Pacific War, hit that subscribe button. We're breaking down the tactics and strategies that textbooks overlook. The American military faces this logistics problem with brutal clarity in early 1942. General Douglas MacArthur's staff calculates the requirements for a single infantry division operating in the Pacific. Each division needs approximately 650 tons of supplies per day. That includes food, ammunition, medical supplies, fuel, spare parts, and miscellaneous equipment. A single division per day. Now multiply that by the dozens of divisions required to fight across thousands of miles of island chains. The numbers become astronomical. Traditional military logistics doctrine relies on established supply lines: ports, railways, warehouses, roads. The European theater, even in wartime, has infrastructure. Occupied France has railroads. North Africa has ports. Italy has roads built by Romans 2,000 years ago. The Pacific has none of this. Most of the islands American forces need to capture are barely on the maps. Some have never been surveyed. Dense jungle covers terrain that makes road construction nearly impossible. The idea of building conventional supply chains across this environment seems beyond reach. The U.S. Navy understands ocean transport. They can move cargo ships across the Pacific, but getting supplies from ship to shore and then from shore to soldiers 5 miles inland through jungle swamp presents a problem no peacetime planner ever solved. Landing craft exist, but in limited numbers. Most are designed for European beaches, not coral reefs. Trucks are useless without roads. The jungle eats temporary roads within weeks. Malaria and dysentery kill porters faster than Japanese snipers. Early operations confirmed the nightmare. The August 1942 landing at Guadalcanal succeeds in putting Marines ashore. Keeping them supplied nearly fails. Japanese naval forces control the waters around the island at night. American ships can only approach during daylight hours, and they can't stay long. The Navy calls it the Cactus Express, running supplies to Henderson Field under constant threat. Marines on the island start calling their situation Starvation Island. They're living on captured Japanese rice because American supply ships can't guarantee delivery. This is what the Japanese expected. This is what their doctrine predicted. The Americans have industrial might, yes, but they can't apply it. They're learning the same lesson that defeated every other power trying to fight across oceanic distances. Logistics wins wars, and logistics in the Pacific is impossible. The terrain favors defense. The distances favor Japan. Time favors the empire. Every week, the Americans struggle to supply Guadalcanal proves Tokyo's strategic assumptions correct. But something unexpected is happening back in American factories and shipyards. Something the Japanese high command doesn't understand because they've never seen industrial warfare on this scale. The United States isn't just producing ships and planes and weapons. They're producing the answer to the logistics problem itself. They're manufacturing flexibility. December 1941, the U.S. Maritime Commission had 1,000 cargo ships available. By December 1942, that number reaches 1,800. By December 1943, it will hit 3,300. These aren't just any cargo ships. They're Liberty ships, mass-produced freighters built using assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing. 18 shipyards are churning them out at a pace naval experts said was impossible. The average construction time drops from 230 days to 42 days per ship. One shipyard in Richmond, California builds a complete Liberty ship in less than 5 days as a publicity stunt. Each Liberty ship can carry 10,000 tons of cargo. The fleet growing in American ports represents carrying capacity that dwarfs anything in military history. But ships alone don't solve the last-mile problem. Getting cargo from a ship's hold onto a jungle beach, then moving it inland to soldiers who need it, requires innovation at every step. This is where American industry reveals its real advantage. It's not just quantity, it's adaptability. It's the willingness to invent solutions to problems that military doctrine says are unsolvable. Engineers at Higgins Industries in New Orleans design a new landing craft. The LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, can carry 36 men or a jeep or 3 tons of cargo. It draws less than 3 feet of water, so it can approach close to shore. The bow drops down into a ramp, allowing rapid unloading. Andrew Higgins' factory is producing these craft at a rate of 700 per month by mid-1943. General Eisenhower will later say Higgins is the man who won the war for us, because these simple plywood boats solve the ship-to-shore problem that has plagued amphibious operations for centuries. For shore-to-inland movement, the answer comes from Willys Overland and Ford, the Jeep, a quarter-ton four-wheel-drive vehicle that weighs 2,450 pounds and can carry 800 pounds of cargo or 5 men across terrain that stops conventional trucks. American factories produce 640,000 of these vehicles during the war. They're shipped in pieces and assembled on Pacific islands. They operate without roads. They ford streams. They climb slopes that wheeled vehicles should never manage. They carry supplies, wounded men, ammunition, radio equipment, anything that fits. The Japanese have nothing comparable. Their military trucks require roads. Their logistics system depends on human porters carrying supplies on their backs. A Japanese soldier can carry approximately 60 pounds for about 10 miles per day through jungle terrain. A Jeep carries 800 pounds 50 miles per day through the same terrain. The mathematical advantage is staggering, but it's not visible in any single battle. It accumulates across thousands of small supply runs, week after week, month after month. But then something even more significant emerges, something that changes the fundamental equation of Pacific warfare. The Americans aren't just improving their logistics, they're rethinking what logistics means. By early 1943, American forces are testing a radical new logistics concept. Instead of building permanent supply bases and extending road networks, they're creating mobile, replaceable supply hubs. Everything is modular. Everything is expendable. If the Japanese destroy a supply dump, it doesn't matter. 3 more supply dumps are already being shipped as replacements. This approach violates every principle of traditional military logistics. Doctrine says you protect your supply lines, you build defensible depots, you minimize waste, you create hardened infrastructure that can withstand enemy attack. The American system does the opposite. It accepts losses as inevitable and simply produces more than can be destroyed. It's inefficient by peacetime standards. It would horrify a European general schooled in economy of force. It's also unstoppable. The architects of this system aren't generals, they're civilians in uniform, men who ran department stores and shipping companies and construction firms. They approach military logistics the way they approached commercial distribution. Speed matters more than security. Redundancy matters more than efficiency. Getting supplies to the customer, in this case soldiers, matters more than preserving perfect inventory control. One of these men is a former Sears executive who revolutionizes supply distribution in the Pacific. He studies the problem and realizes the bottleneck isn't production or shipping, it's inventory management. Units are requesting supplies through formal channels that take weeks to process. By the time the paperwork clears, the tactical situation has changed. His solution is simple: pre-package standardized supply bundles and ship them forward before units even request them. Put supplies where they'll be needed before anyone asks. The concept sounds wasteful. It is wasteful. Supplies arrive that units don't immediately need. Some supplies spoil or get damaged before use. Some fall into enemy hands. By traditional metrics, the system loses approximately 20% of shipped supplies to waste or capture, but the 80% that reaches American soldiers arrives faster and more reliably than any logistics system in history. The waste doesn't matter when production can replace it within days. Japanese intelligence officers notice the American supply dumps and draw incorrect conclusions. They see the waste as proof of American inefficiency. Look at all these supplies just sitting in the open, they report. The Americans don't even guard them properly. They stack ammunition next to food, next to fuel. Any competent raid could destroy months' worth of supplies. Tokyo reads these reports and feels reassured. The Americans are careless, undisciplined. Their logistical abundance makes them soft. So the Japanese attack these supply dumps, commando raids, artillery strikes, air attacks when they can manage it. And they succeed. A raid on Guadalcanal in January 1943 destroys a dump containing 4,000 rations, 500 gallons of fuel, and assorted ammunition. Japanese commanders file victory reports. Their soldiers finally get a decent meal from captured American supplies. It feels like a significant achievement. 3 days later, American supply ships deliver replacement supplies that exceed what was destroyed. The temporary shortage barely affects American operations. This is when some Japanese officers begin to understand the trap. You can't attrit an enemy who produces faster than you can destroy. You can't win a logistics battle against an opponent who treats supply dumps as disposable. But the most shocking innovation is still coming. The Americans are about to demonstrate a supply method that Japanese doctrine says is literally impossible. Air supply on a scale no military has ever attempted. The Army, Air Force, and civilian aviation experts are solving the problem of getting supplies to units that have no ports, no beaches, no roads, no nothing. The C-47 Skytrain, the military version of the Douglas DC-3 airliner, becomes the workhorse of this system. Each aircraft can carry 6,000 pounds of cargo. American factories are producing these planes at a rate of 15 per day by mid-1943. The Army Air Force is accumulating hundreds of them in the Pacific Theater. Initially, they're used for troop transport and medical evacuation. Then someone asks a different question. What if we use them to deliver supplies directly to forward units? The idea faces immediate pushback from traditional logistics officers. Air transport is too expensive, they argue, too vulnerable to enemy fighters, too dependent on weather, too limited in carrying capacity. You can't supply an army from the air. The mathematics don't work. One cargo ship carries what 200 transport planes carry. Why waste valuable aircraft on supply runs? The counter-argument comes from officers who understand the Pacific differently. A cargo ship takes weeks to reach forward areas. A transport plane makes the trip in hours. A cargo ship needs a port, or at least a beach. A transport plane just needs a relatively flat piece of ground 2,000 feet long. The Pacific is covered in islands where landing craft can't go, but aircraft can. Air supply doesn't replace sea supply. It complements it. It reaches places ships can't go. The first major test comes in New Guinea in early 1943. Australian and American forces are pushing through the Owen Stanley Mountains toward Japanese positions on the north coast. The terrain is among the most hostile on Earth, razor-backed ridges, valleys choked with jungle, slopes so steep that climbing them leaves men exhausted. No roads exist, no roads can be built. Porter lines stretch for miles, and they can barely keep pace with advancing troops. Then the transports arrive. C-47s begin dropping supplies by parachute to forward units, food, ammunition, medicine. The drops are inaccurate at first. Supplies land in trees, in rivers, on slopes too steep to recover them. Losses run above 30% initially, but the system improves rapidly. Air crews develop better techniques. Ground units mark drop zones more effectively. Within weeks, loss rates drop below 15%. Within months, they're below 10%. The volume of air supply grows week by week. By mid-1943, the Army Air Force is delivering approximately 70 tons of supplies per day to New Guinea by air. By early 1944, that number exceeds 200 tons per day. Japanese forces facing these supplied units can't comprehend what they're experiencing. The enemy advances through terrain that should make supply impossible, yet they never run short of ammunition. They never run out of food. Their wounded evacuate by air. Their reinforcements arrive by air. It's warfare divorced from terrain. Japanese soldiers intercept American supply drops when they can. What they find shocks them more than the volume. It's the variety. American soldiers receive fresh fruit, coffee, cigarettes, chocolate, medical supplies that Japanese doctors haven't seen in months. Quinine for malaria in quantities that seem impossible. One captured supply manifest lists items that seem absurd to Japanese eyes. Ice cream mix, reading material, phonograph records. The Americans are supplying luxuries by air while Japanese soldiers are starving. This isn't accident or waste. It's deliberate strategy. American military leadership understands something about morale and effectiveness. A well-fed, well-supplied soldier fights better than a starving one. Obvious, perhaps. But the Americans take it to extremes that other nations consider unaffordable. They're calculating that the cost of abundant supply pays for itself in combat effectiveness. They're proving that soldiers who aren't weak from malnutrition, who aren't distracted by hunger, who aren't demoralized by watching comrades die from preventable disease, perform better in battle. The Japanese military tradition views this approach as weakness. Bushido teaches that hardship builds character, that soldiers should endure suffering without complaint, that luxury corrupts fighting spirit. This philosophy worked when both sides faced similar constraints. It fails catastrophically when one side has constraints and the other side has ice cream. Now here's where you should smash that like button, because we're about to explore how this supply advantage translated into battlefield dominance. Air supply enables a new kind of warfare in the Pacific. American forces can now advance regardless of terrain. They can bypass Japanese strongpoints and let them wither on the vine. If a fortified position controls the only road, it doesn't matter. American units go around it, supplied by air, and the fortress becomes irrelevant. Japanese garrisons designed to guard supply lines find themselves defending supply lines that don't exist. The strategy becomes obvious by late 1943. Island hopping, leapfrogging, whatever name it gets, the concept is the same. Don't assault every Japanese-held island. Select strategic locations, usually ones where airfields can be built. Capture those. Supply them by air and sea. Use them as bases to capture the next strategic location. Bypass everything else. Let Japanese garrisons sit on islands that no longer matter to the war effort. This strategy only works with overwhelming logistics. Each captured island needs instant supply, because Japanese counterattacks come fast. Traditional logistics would require weeks to establish a supply base. The American system does it in days. Ships arrive with preloaded supplies. Landing craft shuttle them ashore. Seabees bulldoze supply dumps and airfields simultaneously. Transport planes begin landing before the shooting stops. Within a week, a captured island has supply infrastructure that exceeds what the Japanese built in months. The human cost of this logistics advantage becomes clear in battles across the Pacific. Take Peleliu in September 1944. American forces land on this small island expecting a 3-day battle. The Japanese have prepared elaborate cave defenses. The fighting lasts 2 months. American casualties exceed 9,000 men. But American forces never run short of supplies. Artillery fires continuously because shells arrive continuously. Wounded men receive immediate treatment because medical supplies are abundant. Units rotate out of line for rest because replacement forces arrive on schedule. The Japanese garrison fights with equal courage. They inflict heavy casualties. They hold out far longer than expected. but they're doing it on dwindling supplies that can't be replaced. Their artillery fires sparingly because every shell is precious. Their wounded die from infections because medicine ran out weeks ago. Their troops fight on half rations, then quarter rations, then no rations at all. By the end, Japanese soldiers are making final charges not because of orders, but because starvation has made defense pointless. The scale of American logistical effort in the Pacific reaches levels that seem absurd even to the people implementing it. By 1944, the U.S. military is operating what amounts to a global transportation and distribution network that dwarfs any commercial system in existence. The numbers stop making intuitive sense. They become abstract, but to Japanese soldiers experiencing the results, those numbers represent an incomprehensible reality. Consider the island of Tinian in the Marianas. American forces capture this island in July 1944 after 9 days of fighting. The island is roughly 12 miles long and 6 miles wide, barely larger than Manhattan. Within months, Seabees transform it into the busiest airfield in the world. They build 4 runways, each over 8,000 feet long. They construct hardstands for hundreds of B-29 bombers. They create fuel storage for millions of gallons of aviation gas. They build barracks, mess halls, hospitals, recreation facilities. The construction requires 15,000 workers and 3 million man-hours of labor. The supply requirements for Tinian are staggering. Every gallon of fuel arrives by ship. Every bomb, every bullet, every meal, every replacement part, every stick of furniture. The island produces nothing. Everything is imported. At peak operations, supply ships are arriving daily, sometimes multiple ships per day. The harbor becomes a precisely choreographed dance of vessels loading and unloading around the clock. Harbor masters track tonnage in numbers that would supply entire nations in previous wars. From Tinian, B-29s begin flying missions against Japan. Each bomber carries 20,000 pounds of bombs. A typical mission involves 500 aircraft. That's 5 million pounds of ordnance delivered in a single raid. And the raids come regularly. The bombs must come from somewhere. They're manufactured in American factories, shipped across the Pacific, unloaded at Tinian, stored, loaded onto aircraft, and dropped on Japan. The entire chain, from factory floor to target, represents a logistics pipeline operating at a scale unprecedented in human history. Japanese industry cannot comprehend this abundance. Japan's entire annual bomb production in 1944 is approximately 160,000 tons. The Americans dropped that much on Japan in a few months of raids. The Japanese aviation industry produces 28,000 aircraft in 1944, which sounds impressive until you learn American factories produce 96,000 aircraft the same year. Japanese shipyards manage 1.7 million tons of shipping. American yards produce 11.7 million tons. The ratios aren't close, they're grotesque. But raw numbers still don't capture the real advantage. The American logistics system isn't just bigger, it's smarter. It's learning and adapting faster than the Japanese system can respond. Every problem generates multiple solutions. Every bottleneck gets addressed with industrial creativity. Take refrigeration. Tropical heat spoils food rapidly. Early in the war, American units deal with this through canned rations. Canned food is stable, but monotonous. Morale suffers, so the military develops mobile refrigeration units. Trucks with refrigeration equipment powered by generators. These units can keep fresh food cold even in jungle heat. By 1944, American soldiers in forward areas are eating fresh meat and vegetables. Not regularly, not every day, but frequently enough that it seems normal. The Japanese military would consider this an inexcusable luxury. But American planners see it differently. They calculate that better food reduces disease rates. Lower disease rates mean more effective soldiers. More effective soldiers mean shorter battles. Shorter battles mean fewer casualties. The refrigeration units pay for themselves in reduced medical costs and improved combat performance. It's not luxury, it's investment. Or consider water. Tropical islands have water, but not clean water. Dysentery and other waterborne diseases can cripple units faster than enemy action. The traditional solution is boiling water or using chemical purification tablets. Both work, both are slow. The Americans develop portable water purification units that can process thousands of gallons per day. These units turn questionable water into safe drinking water at a rate that keeps entire regiments hydrated. Japanese soldiers drink from streams and suffer predictable consequences. The innovation extends to medical logistics. American forces bring field hospitals that would qualify as well-equipped civilian hospitals in most countries, surgical facilities, X-ray machines, blood plasma in quantities that seem wasteful until you see how many lives it saves. The medical evacuation chain moves wounded soldiers from front line to surgical theater in hours. Survival rates for wounded American soldiers in the Pacific exceed 70%. Japanese wounded who can't walk often die where they fall. This medical logistics advantage creates a feedback loop. American soldiers know that wounds won't mean death. They know evacuation is reliable. They know treatment is available. This knowledge doesn't make them reckless, but it does make them confident. Japanese soldiers know the opposite. Wounds often mean slow death. Evacuation is unlikely. Treatment is primitive. This knowledge breeds desperation. Desperate soldiers make different tactical decisions than confident ones. By 1945, the logistics gap has widened into a chasm. The Japanese military is operating on fumes. Training flights are canceled to save fuel. Aircraft sit grounded for lack of parts. Ships stay in port because they can't risk the fuel for operations that might encounter American naval forces. Ground units prepare for the defense of the home islands with ammunition reserves that won't last a week of serious fighting. The plan relies on spiritual strength and suicide tactics because material resources no longer exist. Meanwhile, American logistics is preparing for the invasion of Japan with plans that seem like fantasy. Operation Downfall, the proposed invasion, calls for assembling the largest amphibious force in history. The initial landings would involve 14 divisions, approximately 200,000 men. Follow-up forces would bring the total to over 1 million soldiers. The supply plan calls for stockpiling months' worth of supplies on Okinawa and other forward bases, millions of tons of ammunition, food for millions of men, fuel for thousands of vehicles and aircraft, medical supplies for hundreds of thousands of anticipated casualties. The logistics officers planning Downfall aren't worried about whether they can deliver these supplies. They know they can. They've spent 3 years proving they can. Their concern is coordinating the delivery efficiently. It's not a question of capability. It's a question of scheduling. This confidence would seem like arrogance, except it's based on demonstrated performance. Japanese military intelligence receives reports about American logistics preparations and struggles to believe them. The numbers seem impossible. Surely these are exaggerations or deceptions. No nation can sustain supply operations on this scale. The reports must be wrong, but the reports aren't wrong. They're understating the reality, if anything. Consider the fuel requirements alone. American forces in the Pacific are consuming approximately 800,000 barrels of fuel per day by mid-1945. That's 33.6 million gallons daily. For comparison, Japan's entire oil imports peaked at roughly 30 million barrels per year before the war. The Americans are burning more fuel in a week than Japan imported in a month at peacetime peak. The mathematics make Japanese resistance seem not just futile, but absurd. Yet the Japanese fight on, partly from courage, partly from desperation. Partly because surrender feels impossible culturally, but also partly because the troops on the ground don't always understand the full strategic picture. A Japanese soldier on a bypassed island doesn't see the statistics. He sees his foxhole and his comrades and his duty. He doesn't know that his garrison is irrelevant to the war effort. He doesn't know that American supply ships are simply sailing past his island to targets that matter more. The bypassed garrisons present a strange tragedy. Thousands of Japanese soldiers sit on Pacific islands, cut off from supply, slowly starving while the war moves past them. Some garrisons hold out until August 1945. Some hold out longer, not learning about the surrender for weeks or months. They endure incredible hardship for positions that stopped mattering strategically in 1943 or 1944. Their courage is real. Their sacrifice is real. The strategic meaninglessness of their position is also real. This is what overwhelming logistics creates. The ability to make enemy strongpoints irrelevant. You don't have to defeat every enemy force if you can simply bypass them and let supply failure do the work. It's a brutal calculus, but effective. The Japanese built their Pacific Island defenses, expecting the Americans to fight for every island. The Americans rewrote the rules and made most islands not worth fighting for. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki end the war before Operation Downfall launches. The invasion never happens. The massive logistics stockpiles sit unused. In some ways, this is the final demonstration of American logistics superiority. They prepared so thoroughly for an invasion that the invasion became unnecessary. The display of capability, the obvious readiness, contributed to the decision matrix that led to surrender. After the war, historians and military analysts study the Pacific Campaign, trying to identify the decisive factor in American victory. Technology, American aircraft improved throughout the war. Tactics, island hopping proved effective. Leadership, American generals learned from early mistakes. Industrial capacity, the production numbers speak for themselves. But underneath all these factors, logistics stands as the foundation enabling everything else. Technology doesn't matter if you can't deploy it. Tactics don't matter if you can't supply the forces executing them. Leadership doesn't matter if commanders have no resources to implement their plans. Industrial capacity doesn't matter if you can't move products from factories to battlefields. Logistics is the invisible essential. It's boring. It's unglamorous. It doesn't make for dramatic battle narratives, but it wins wars. The Japanese military learned this lesson at catastrophic cost. Their doctrine emphasized fighting spirit over material factors. This philosophy worked against opponents with similar constraints. It failed against an opponent who removed the constraints entirely. Bushido taught that soldiers should endure hardship. American logistics taught that hardship is optional if you can afford to eliminate it. Some Japanese officers understood this even during the war. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who commanded forces at Iwo Jima, wrote in letters to his family about the impossibility of defeating an enemy with such overwhelming material advantage. He knew his garrison would be destroyed. He knew supply lines wouldn't hold. He knew American logistics would enable a battle of attrition that Japan couldn't win. He fought anyway, because duty required it, but he understood the mathematics were impossible. After the war, the Japanese self-defense forces studied American logistics as carefully as they studied American tactics. The lessons shaped post-war Japanese military thinking. Never again would Japanese military planning dismiss logistics as secondary to fighting spirit. Never again would material factors be treated as less important than morale. The war taught that courage without supply lines is just slow-motion defeat. For the Americans, the Pacific logistics experience shaped Cold War military planning. The ability to project power globally, to supply forces anywhere on Earth, became a cornerstone of American military strategy. The infrastructure built for World War II, the expertise developed, the systems tested, all carried forward. The U.S. military became the world's premier logistics force not through accident, but through hard lessons learned in Pacific jungles. The lessons extend beyond military applications. The logistics systems developed for war transformed civilian supply chains after the war. Container shipping, air freight, distributed inventory management, these concepts all have roots in World War II military logistics. The global economy's ability to move goods anywhere rapidly comes partly from innovations developed to move ammunition and rations to soldiers fighting on remote islands.